And okay, so like I said, welcome. And for those of you who are members of Wild Virginia, we really, really appreciate your support. For those of you who aren't, if you're able to and would like to become a member, you can go to our website, which is listed here, www.wildvirginia.org, and sign up. Even if you don't want to become a member, you can go to our website to learn more about what we do. We have blogs, we have all sorts of things so you can learn about what Wild Virginia does. Currently, our most active campaigns are the three that are listed here. The first is habitat connectivity, which is something we're really excited about. It's a collaborative project involving everybody from the Department of Transportation to colleges such as William and Mary and Virginia Tech, the Smithsonian Conservation Institute. And the purpose of this campaign is to think about ways that animals can move safely through the environment. So if VDOT is planning a new road project, are there things that they can do that will mitigate the danger to animals crossing that new road? But we're interested in large animals like deer, and VDOT, of course, is interested in avoiding collisions, but also in smaller animals. Can salamanders get to their breeding ponds safely, and that sort of thing? And our executive director, Misty Bose, has been kind of heading up this coalition, and we're pretty excited about it. The next campaign is the campaign to protect Virginia's water future. And that's about making sure that that the laws are followed to protect our water quality. And that, of course, helps both us and non-human beings. And then the last but not least is we had great success fighting the Atlantic Coast Pipeline along with many other organizations. And we continue to work with those organizations to fight the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We have a pretty active outings and education program. Outings, as you can imagine, have been put on hold recently, but we're hoping, depending on how things go with Delta, to start them back up again this fall. But in the meantime, we have online events like the one you're attending right now. Upcoming events include a talk on the current and future geography of conservation in Virginia, and that one will be about tools to look at various landscapes within Virginia. And then we have a book club that meets monthly from the fall until the spring. And our first meeting this fall will be a book called The Secret Lives of Bats, which is by Merlin Tuttle, in case you want to get ahead on the reading. And then on October 28th, we'll be having a talk from Leslie Sturgis, who is the head of the Save Lucy the Bat campaign. And we're calling that talk Batstravaganza. And we've planned our two bat events to be in October, given the popularity of bats around Halloween time. So that's all that, that I wanted to say. And I'm going to turn it over to Angela, who's going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Again, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bet. So I have the honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Ariel Firebaugh tonight, and she is the Director of Scientific Engagement at Blandy Experimental Farm right in Winchester, Virginia. And she spends her time there developing outreach programming that highlights Blandy's outstanding natural resources and also ecological research programs. Now, she has spent a good portion of her life studying fireflies, specifically the effects of light pollution on firefly behavior and ecology. And she spent time during her dissertation research actually training folks like ourselves, homeowners, a lot of folks from the Virginia Master Naturalist program. She trained them how to census fireflies in their own backyards. And she's also been part of Blandy's Family Firefly Festival ever since its inception. Now, Bet said for our attendees tonight, if you have questions, please use the Q&A button, and I'll be monitoring that tonight, and I'll be saving those questions till the end for Ariel. So thank you so much, Ariel, for joining us this evening, and I am turning it over to you now.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm just so tickled to death that I could speak with you all this evening about fireflies. I never miss an opportunity to talk to people about fireflies because I just think they're so much fun. So thanks so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to share my screen. Okay. So mostly tonight we're going to be talking about fireflies, but I have to start out with a quick Blandy commercial. So we'll get through that and then we'll get back to the fireflies. So I'm speaking to you this evening from my office at Blandy Experimental Farm. That's what you can see in the background. Here's what our building looks like. This is our historic quarters building. And we are located just outside of Winchester, Virginia. So right up here at the tippy top of the state. We are a couple of different things. We are a University of Virginia field research station. So we have about 20 to 30 scientists who live and work here every summer studying native insects and plants. We're also the state Arboretum of Virginia. So we have thousands of different species of trees here from all over the world. But I think most folks probably know us as just a fun place to come, explore, take pictures, discover Virginia wildlife. So if you happen to be in our area, I would really welcome you to come and stop by. We're open every day of the year, dawn to dusk, and there's no admission charge or anything like that. So please do feel free to stop by. We'd love to see you. I am lucky enough to have been able to live and work at Blandy for a number of years. So at the moment, I'm the director of scientific engagement. So I get to talk to people about science and critters every day. It's so much fun. But before this, I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia. So here's a photo of me. I am all geared up and ready to study fireflies for the evening. I've got my net and my little headlamp and my boots because it's wet out there at night. And I just had so much fun studying fireflies in graduate school. One of the things that I've learned in my time as a firefly scientist is that these are not like your typical insect. Fireflies are so charismatic. And if you grew up in this part of the world, you probably have fond memories of going out on a hot, sticky evening, catching fireflies, putting them in jars, maybe putting the jar on your bedside table to serve as this kind of magical glowing nightlight. Or maybe you have really fond memories of going outside on a summer evening when the fireflies were putting on a magical light show. Maybe it almost looked like flames were flickering up out of the grass. It can be really spectacular. People just love fireflies. Nobody is going out, for example, and catching cockroaches and putting them in mason jars and putting those jars on their bedside table, right? That just doesn't happen. So fireflies really have this special place in a lot of our hearts. So tonight, I'm really excited to get to share a little bit with you all about what makes fireflies so special. And I'm hopeful that by the end of this talk, you'll have learned a little bit that will help you to go out maybe next summer or maybe even this fall and go on a little firefly safari and appreciate your local firefly community. So in this talk, we'll cover a little bit about firefly natural history. We'll talk about why fireflies flash. We'll go over some common groups of fireflies that you might encounter, especially if you live in Virginia. And then we'll touch a little bit about whether firefly populations are declining and what we know about that. So that's just a little overview of what we're going to talk about this evening. So first, what the heck is a firefly? Well, contrary to their name, they are not firefly. They are not flies. They are actually beetles. Like other beetles, they have two sets of wings, a hard outer set, and then a soft inner set. So not flies, they are actually beetles. The name is a little bit misleading. But some of you may know these insects not as fireflies, but as lightning bugs. So there's actually has been a study on this. And it turns out that depending on where you grew up, you may have grown up calling these fun little insects that fly around at night and flash fireflies or lightning bugs, or maybe you use both interchangeably. So this is a great study that was done by a gentleman at North Carolina State University. He surveyed hundreds of thousands of people, asked them, what do you call those insects that fly around at night and flash? And if you grew up in Southwest Virginia, so this blue area, you may have grown up calling these insects exclusively lightning bugs. But if you grew up in other parts of the state, like up here in Winchester, you may have called them fireflies sometimes or lightning bugs other times. I'm going to be using the term fireflies in this talk just because it's fewer syllables. But I think we can all agree that whatever you call these insects, they are pretty stinking cool. Okay, so now you may also have heard the term glowworm. And this is one of those common names that can be used to apply to a lot of different critters, some of which are related and some of which are maybe a little bit more distantly related. So if you hear somebody talking about a glowworm, they could maybe be talking about, over here on the right, a European member of that firefly family. So there are some species of fireflies in Europe whose females do not have wings as adults, and so they look a little bit like worms, and so sometimes they are called glowworms. So this is our one firefly that could be called a glowworm. But you could also use the term glowworm to talk about something that is not a firefly at all. So you could be talking about a glowworm beetle. You could be talking about one of these bioluminescent millipedes, or you could be talking about a fungus gnat that lives in a cave in New Zealand. So a lot of different critters could be referred to by the name glowworm. But in this talk, I'm going to be speaking about those beetles that are in the family Lampyridae. So that's the family that includes fireflies, lightning bugs, all those little creatures that we're used to seeing flying around and flashing outside on summer evenings. There's a huge amount of firefly diversity worldwide. So fireflies occur on every continent except Antarctica, and there are about 2,000 species worldwide. Here are just a few examples of the wonderful firefly diversity that we have. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. So I think probably a lot of us are used to fireflies that look maybe like this or like this. These are the ones that we see out flying around and flashing at night. If you are lucky enough to live in the Great Smoky Mountains or near there, you may have experience with some synchronous fireflies. So these are fireflies where all of the fireflies in an area will flash at the exact same time. And I have not been lucky enough to see this, but if you have, please do let me know in the chat. I've heard that it's just magnificent. But then believe it or not, there are also fireflies that are most active during the day. And so this is just another little taste of some of the firefly diversity that we have around here in the eastern United States, but especially in Virginia. So because fireflies are beetles, they have a really interesting life cycle. So just like butterflies, their juvenile stage looks really different than their adult stage. So just like caterpillars look really different than butterflies, larval fireflies and baby fireflies look really different than the adults. So we are used to probably thinking about these adults. So they've got the wings, they fly around, they flash. But in reality, a firefly is only in this adult stage for a couple months out of its lifespan. So, you know, the adults lay eggs, the eggs hatch into larvae, and fireflies actually spend 1 to 2 years of their lives in this larval stage. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of what a baby firefly looks like in just a minute. But for now, think about what do you imagine a baby firefly might look like? Do you think it has wings? Do you think it has legs? Do you think it can flash or glow? This is honestly something that I had not considered at all before I became a firefly scientist. So I was really shocked to discover what baby fireflies look like. Are we ready for the big reveal? Okay. So this is a baby firefly, believe it or not. And they are maybe not what you would expect, but it's almost as though you took a roly-poly and squished it flat like a pancake. And then they do actually glow. So you can't see this in this picture, but if you were to flip this one on its stomach, you would see that they have these two little tail lights on their back end. Not many people can say that they've seen these, but this will be a fun challenge for you all this fall, now that you know. So firefly larvae are out during the fall. So nights maybe in late September, October. If you go out at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night in a natural area, you may be lucky enough to see these little faint green glows down on the ground. And you might think that you're seeing things, but you're not. It could be a baby firefly. So go out on a baby firefly safari this fall. See if you can find any. They are pretty cool. But anyway, it just blows my mind that most of the time that a firefly is a firefly in its life cycle, it looks more like this crazy thing than this adult. It blows my mind. Okay, so now you may be asking, well, where do fireflies fit in the food chain? What is their role in the ecosystem? So remember, fireflies spend most of their lives as larvae, so 1 to 2 years versus just a couple of months as adults. And so for many firefly species that we have around here, they need to do most of their eating as larvae because the adults, for the most part, well, for many species, don't eat at all. So these firefly larvae are actually fierce predators, and they will eat soft-bodied invertebrates down in the soil. So beetle grubs, worms, slugs, snails, and they have this venom that they can actually use to inject into their prey to immobilize them. So these firefly larvae, we know, are predators. But then, they become adults, and many firefly species do not eat at all as adults. We'll talk about an exception in a minute. But they can be eaten by some invertebrates. So occasionally you'll be out on a hike and you'll see kind of a weird firefly flash. And if you get closer to investigate, you may find that it's a firefly that's been caught in a spider's web and it's being wrapped up and is sending what I imagine is something like an SOS signal. I'm sure that's not what it is, but that's just what it seems like to me. So sometimes spiders or harvestmen will eat fireflies. They don't really have many vertebrate predators. We think it's because they produce these compounds that taste really bad to vertebrates. So frogs, bats are probably not eating a whole lot of fireflies because they just taste bad. And then there are also these special predator fireflies in the genus Photuris that will eat other firefly prey, which is pretty cool. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so this is kind of where fireflies fit into the food chain. They're probably not important pollinators, but they may play an important role in soil food webs as larvae. I'll just pause and say that we know a lot more about the adults than we do about firefly larvae. So this is an area where if you are an aspiring firefly scientist, there are all kinds of cool questions that you can ask to learn more about these baby fireflies. Okay, so we talked a little bit about fireflies, what they are, where they fit into the food chain. Now let's move on to why do fireflies flash? Well, okay, so first of all, not all fireflies flash. Most of them do, at least the ones that we commonly think of. But there are a couple of special fireflies that are more active during the day than during the night. So here are two examples, fireflies in the genera Elychnia and Lucidota. And we do have these fireflies around here in Virginia. You may be walking through a field or kind of a shrubby area one day during the summer and have one of these little guys land on you. To me, they kind of look like goth fireflies just because they tend to be a little bit darker than the nocturnal ones. Anthropomorphically, it seems to me that they've chosen this subversive diurnal lifestyle, which is just me projecting onto the firefly. But they're pretty cool looking. And what you'll also notice is they have these really big, brushy, sticky antennae. And we think that they use these antennae to collect pheromones to find other fireflies to mate with. So we think that they are maybe using chemical signals to find other fireflies to mate with. So if you were to flip over one of these fireflies, they would not have that big organ that flashes because they don't flash. But of course, you know, the fireflies that we all went out and caught and put in mason jars did flash. So here's just one example. You know, firefly scientists, I think, have too much fun sometimes. It feels like every firefly term has to be light related somehow. So the technical term for that abdominal light organ that produces the flash is the lantern. So if you read a scientific paper about fireflies, you might see something about a lantern. But as you can see, it's on the belly of the firefly. These are pictures of one of my favorite fireflies. The scientific name is Photinus pyralls. Photinus pyralls, because again, everything has to be light related with fireflies, it seems like. But the common names that I've heard for this species are the common eastern firefly or the Big Dipper firefly. And one really useful thing about this species is that the male light organ is quite a bit bigger than the female. So that's kind of one fun way that you can tell apart males and females in this species. So fireflies, if they're flashing, they have this abdominal light organ called the lantern, and they are flashing to find other fireflies that are the same species to potentially mate with. So kind of the same way that many songbird species have a unique song that they will give to find other birds that are the same species. Fireflies all kind of have unique patterns of flashes, and we'll see some examples in a minute. But so when you see them out there flashing about, they're having these little flash conversations. So often it's the males that we'll see flying around and flashing, and those males are just hoping that there will be a female somewhere, maybe down on the vegetation, who will flash back, and the two of them will just kind of keep flashing at each other, and then, you know, eventually, if the stars align, they may come together and mate. And so here are two mating fireflies. Scandalous, I know. But the females will typically mate multiple times during their lives, and then, you know, will lay eggs down in the grass. So different firefly species have different patterns of flashes. And, you know, some species have a longer flash. Some species have a really short flash. Some species just flash once at a time. Other species will flash in kind of a pattern. And so if you decide after this talk that you are that person who needs to know every single species of firefly in your backyard, you may find a chart like this useful. And what you can do is, it takes a little bit of patience, but you can sit outside on a hot, sticky summer evening with your cool beverage of choice and use a guide like this. And what you'll be doing is you'll be trying to look for an individual firefly, and you'll try to match up the flashes that you're seeing with how long the flash is and then how much space there is between flashes. And it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of work, but it can be really rewarding once you figure out, oh my gosh, that's, I'm seeing this flash pattern and this is what species I think it is. It can be really cool. It's almost, to me, a little bit like reading Morse code or reading sheet music. Kind of a fun thing to do. So the firefly flashes that we see, it's not fire, as the name firefly would suggest, and it's not lightning. It's a chemical reaction that's taking place in their light organ or lantern. And it's bioluminescence. So the firefly is making a choice. I want to flash now, and they're sending a little nerve signal down to their lantern, and it's putting into place this physiological reaction that causes this bioluminescent flash to take place. And the really VIP chemical enzyme in this bioluminescent reaction is called Luciferase, because again, everything fireflies has to be light related. So it's kind of a cool enzyme that causes this chemical reaction to take place. But it also has some really interesting commercial and industrial applications. So in particular, luciferase can be used to detect the presence of a bacterial contaminant on maybe a surface, or maybe drinking water, or maybe a food product that is being produced commercially. So if bacteria is present in the sample and you add in luciferase, it glows. And so, these days we can produce this luciferase chemical in the lab, but that wasn't always the case. So, and in fact, during the 60s through the 80s, your summer job could have been to catch fireflies so that a chemical company could extract that luciferase enzyme from the fireflies. And if you had this as your summer job at some point in your life, please do let us know in the chat. But there was this company called Sigma. Today, I think it's called Sigma Aldrich, but they would recruit kids all over the country to go out, catch fireflies, put them in a little envelope, send them off to Sigma. And here's a little newspaper ad, but they promise a bicycle and cash prizes if you send in fireflies. Elsewhere, I've heard it quoted that they would pay a penny a firefly. So it sounds like a summer job that was maybe a lot of fun. But of course, what we don't really know is how this affected firefly populations. And one figure I saw was that potentially 90 million fireflies were harvested to extract out this enzyme to use commercially. So although I'm sure that this was a very fun summer job for the kiddos involved, I am glad that we can produce luciferase synthetically now in the lab, so that we can save the firefly catching for just making observations and being curious, and we can let the fireflies go at the end of the night. So we talked a little bit about firefly natural history and why fireflies flash. And now what I'll go through is a couple of the really common groups of fireflies that you might encounter, especially if you live in Virginia. So if you are interested in learning about how to identify fireflies, there are a couple of key morphological features that you can look for. And I've just shown some of them here. So we already talked about the firefly light organ, the lantern. Sometimes that can give you some clues. Other things that you might want to look for are the overall coloration of the firefly, the shape of the firefly's body. Also, the antennae, are they kind of straight or are they really brushy, like we saw for those diurnal fireflies? And you can also look at this special structure that they have. It's kind of like a plate on the back of their neck. It's called the pronotum. And often this pronotum will be really brightly colored with red and yellow and black. So these are some morphological features that you can look at to help you determine what kind of firefly you're looking at. But then there are also some other characteristics that might give you some important clues. So for example, how is the firefly flashing? Is it a single flash at a time or a rhythm of flashes? Other information that's good to look at is, when is the firefly flashing? So is it right around sunset or twilight? Is it an hour or so after sunset? Or are you encountering this firefly during the day? Maybe it's one of those cool diurnal fireflies. Another thing to look at could be, where is the firefly flashing? Is it in the grass? Is it way up in the tree canopies? Where is it in the environment? And then also, one of my favorite clues is behavior, which we'll talk a little bit about. But fireflies, once you get to know them, can have some very interesting personalities. So the first group of fireflies that we'll talk about are fireflies in the genus Photinus. Some people say Photinus. I've learned that as long as you say a scientific name with confidence, you're good to go. So I'll probably say Photinus, but whatever floats your boat. These fireflies will often have a flash that looks yellow in color. And then if you look down at their light organ or their lantern, it's kind of rounded down at the base. I'll see if I can annotate this. Yeah, so it's more of a rounded shape. But then also, if you catch one of these fireflies in a vial or a jar, you may notice that it will stop flashing when captured. And not all fireflies will do that. So my favorite example of a firefly in the genus Photinus is this Photinus pyralls. So you may also hear this called a common eastern firefly or a Big Dipper firefly. But these are those fireflies that start flashing right at around sunset. And they are pretty slow flyers. So you can almost kind of scoop them out of the air with your hands. You almost don't even need a net to catch these Photinus pyralls fireflies. And for that reason, if you have a young firefly scientist in your life with a big jar full of fireflies, it's very likely that most of the fireflies in that jar will be this Photinus pyralls firefly. They are pretty abundant, pretty widespread. They'll hang out in natural areas, but also suburban areas as well. So this is one of my favorite fireflies, just because they're fun to catch and they're pretty common. One interesting thing about these fireflies is that if you look out over a field full of these Photinus pyralls fireflies, it may seem to you as though there are just flames flickering up out of the grass. And that's because these fireflies will raise up a little bit as they're flashing. So sometimes you'll see this described as a J-shaped flash or a swoosh, but they definitely rise up a little bit as they're flashing. And that's something that is kind of unique to this species. So Photinus pyralls fireflies, one of my personal favorites. In contrast, we have another firefly called the Photuris firefly. What I'll point out to you, let me clear these drawings first, that's awkward. So the Photuris fireflies, if you look at their lantern, it's more of a pointy shape. So with the Photinus fireflies, their lantern was a little bit rounder. With the Photuris fireflies, it's a little bit pointier. And then overall, their coloration is often a little bit tanner in appearance than the Photinus fireflies, especially if you look at the pronotum. They have this really distinct yellow border around their outer wings, their elytra. And if you were to look at these fireflies flashing out in the field, you might think that their flashes looked a little bit greener or whiter in color compared to the Photinus fireflies. Also, these fireflies tend to start flashing a little bit later in the evening, so often an hour or two after sunset, whereas the Photinus pyralls fireflies are really flashing right around sunset or a little bit thereafter. And I hope I can show you. But also, if you were to look at one of these fireflies in profile, its back would look a little bit humped. So it's not flat like the Photinus fireflies, but it's almost a little bit humped in appearance. So these fireflies in the genus Photuris are often predatory. So they will eat fireflies that are a different species. And so here's a picture of one of these really fierce Photuris fireflies eating a prey. And the way that they do this is it's pretty cool. So they can learn flash patterns of other firefly species and mimic those flash patterns. So if you are a prey firefly flying around, hoping that this will be your lucky night and you'll find another firefly to mate with, you might see a flash pattern that looks an awful lot like a firefly of your same species. And you might fly closer to it and closer to it, flashing as you're flying. And then all of a sudden, whoomp, one of these Photuris fireflies grabs you and eats you. It's almost like lions and antelopes, but with fireflies. It's so cool. Another thing is, if you're a firefly scientist and it's been a late night and you accidentally put one of these Photuris fireflies in the same vial as a prey firefly, it's very likely that at the end of the night, there will only be one firefly in that vial, and then little bits of wings from the prey down at the bottom, which is sad. But also it's just amazing how fierce these little predator fireflies are. So those are fireflies in the genus Photuris. And sometimes you'll also see these fireflies called femme fatale fireflies, because they can mimic the flash patterns of prey fireflies and lure them in and eat them. Oh, and so then just as a comparison, we have the Photinus fireflies and the Photuris fireflies. The Photuris fireflies are a little bit tanner in color, and they have this really interesting humpback shape if you look at them in profile, whereas the Photinus fireflies tend to be a little bit more flat. And then we also have these diurnal fireflies. So they are a little bit darker in color. Obviously, they're active during the day. If you were to flip one over, you wouldn't see that really conspicuous lantern. And they often will have these really big brushy antennae as well. So it always feels like a special day to me when I run into one of these diurnal fireflies. Okay, so now I know you are all thinking, well, wait a minute. I have this really special firefly in my yard, and I see it often, and I've always wondered what it is. And if you are that person, and I know many of you probably are, I would really strongly recommend a Firefly Field Guide. It is Well, I can recommend this field guide without reservation because, to my knowledge, it is the only field guide to fireflies in Eastern North America, but it's also just very well written, very readable. It's called Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. It's by Lynn Frierson Faust. So this is a great resource that will set you up well for many, many hours of firefly observations in the future. And if you're not quite ready to go full field guide, there are also some pretty good online resources. So Massachusetts Audubon Society, as one example, has some flash pattern guides that can be a good entry point as well. Oh, and here's Lynn. I love to talk about Lynn because she probably knows just about as much about fireflies in this part of the world as anybody. And she doesn't have any, special firefly degrees or anything. She knows everything because she's gone out and made really diligent observations of the fireflies in her backyard and in her area. And if you do that often enough, you can become a world famous firefly field guide writer and have a really cool pink firefly net like this. So I just think Lynn is great. Okay, so we talked a little bit about fireflies, why they flash, where they fit into the food chain. We've talked about some big groups of fireflies. And now your next question might be, okay, well, that's all good, but are fireflies disappearing? And you'll occasionally see news articles, fireflies are running out, when are the lights going out. It's very easy to come up with a good kind of punny title about fireflies blinking out. But to be honest, we don't really have many long-term data sets about how firefly populations are doing. And that's not really unusual for a lot of insects. They're not a major agricultural pest. They're not an important pollinator. So there's still a lot that we would like to learn about fireflies. And I know this picture is a bit blurry, but the takeaway here is, this is a Firefly conference, worldwide Firefly conference. And, a big chunk of the world's Firefly researchers are shown in this picture. And so what I hope you can see is that it's a small group. So we need all the help we can get to learn as much as we can about how fireflies might be doing. I don't think that we really know for sure. We don't how firefly populations are doing. And I think a lot of that is just because we don't have great long-term data sets. But a lot of people will say, well, it seems like there are fewer now than there were when I was a kid. And we do know that many, many other native insects are declining. And so if we were to think about, if they were declining, what could be some stressors? 3 that I can think of would be pesticides and herbicides on the ground. Remember, they're spending most of their lives as larvae. So anything that, any chemicals or disturbance that's happening in the soil could maybe affect them. But again, we need to do a lot more studies. Another thing that we might look at is habitat loss. So fireflies don't really travel large distances. So if you're taking a field and putting a parking lot there, fireflies are probably not able to disperse away from that area in time. So habitat loss might also be something that we would consider. And then also potentially light pollution. So remember, when you see fireflies out there flying around and flashing, they are looking for other fireflies to mate with. And we are starting to see some research, including some research that I've done, suggesting that if you have a lot of light pollution in an area, the fireflies in that area might just stop flashing, or they might not flash as often. And that could mean that they're also not mating as often. So these are 3 stressors that I think we really want to do some more research on to understand how they might be affecting firefly populations. And we need all the help we can get. So if you like fireflies and would like to contribute to our knowledge about fireflies, there are some things that we can do. And I think the first step is always just to take a couple minutes to appreciate your local firefly community. So, next summer, or maybe even this fall, when the larvae come out, take some time to sit outside and just notice, who am I seeing? Where are the fireflies flashing? Can I see different flash patterns? Do I think I'm seeing different species? So this is a really great place to start, is just take some time to appreciate your local firefly community. Another thing that you can do is take a look at your local firefly habitat and think, is there one change that I might be able to make that would just generally support native insects? So do I have an opportunity to be a little bit more targeted in where I'm using herbicides or pesticides? Or maybe if I'm mowing the lawn, is there a time for me to do that is not at sunset or dusk when the fireflies are just kind of starting to come out at night? So are there changes that you can make that are comfortable for you that could support native insects? And then another thing, there are some really great citizen and community science projects out there that would love your data. So there are a couple that are Firefly specific, like Firefly Watch and the Vanishing Firefly Project. And then also there are some general groups like iNaturalist. There's still so much that we need to learn about fireflies. And so, for many species, even just for oftentimes, even just presence and absence data can be really valuable. So even just, going on to iNaturalist and taking a picture of a firefly that you saw during the day, that can be helpful because there's a lot that we need to learn. So thanks so much for sitting here with me in this journey to learn about these fascinating insects. I'm so appreciative of your time, and thanks also to the fireflies for being just so magical and inspiring, and helping many young insect scientists like myself back when I was a kiddo, catching fireflies and putting them into jars, learn how to be curious and find wonder in the natural world. So thanks so much for your time this evening. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Ariel. And I have several questions that are queued up for you here. I'm going to try to group some of these together around certain topics. There were several questions about the larvae in general, such as, what's the scale, what's their size, where do I see them? Do I see them in the soil? Are they burrowed into the ground?
Great questions. So a firefly larva, it's about the same size as an adult. So I don't know, if you think about like maybe the size of your thumbnail or a little bit bigger. And then in terms of where they are, they will be typically on the ground. And I've had the greatest success finding them in areas where the soil is moist. So especially near kind of a wetland area. And then, you do have to be a little bit lucky and channeling all the right firefly vibes. But there's one place where I've learned if I sit out there on a kind of a warm night in October at Blandy, it's kind of next to a wetland, the soil is really moist. And if I am brave enough to turn off my flashlight and just sit and listen to all the nature noises, it won't be long before I start to see little green glows down in the grass. And those are baby fireflies.
Really cool. There were also several questions on geography, in the United States. Are they everywhere, or how far do they go from east to west? But then also specifically, are they in Britain?
Ooh, good question. Okay. So fireflies are certainly most abundant east of the Mississippi River. So there are, they do extend a little bit past that, and there are pockets out west. Like I think that there's a population or a couple of little populations out in Utah. But it's not uncommon, if you have grown up in a place like California or Oregon or Washington, to have not seen a firefly until you make a trip out east. So they are most abundant in America, at least east of the Mississippi. And then worldwide, they're found on every continent except Antarctica, and they're also found in Britain. So fireflies in Britain, I think there's one species that is most common. And with that species, the males have wings and the females do not. And so sometimes you'll be reading a poem and it might talk about glowworms glistening in the grass. And it could be one of those female fireflies that they're talking about that doesn't have wings, so it looks like a worm.
Kind of along these same lines of geography and habitat, where do they, in terms of, sorry, I just realized my microphone wasn't pointed at me. In terms of habitat, where do they hang out the most? Is it wooded areas, grassy areas, trees, shrubs? Do they come out more after rain? Those kinds of things.
Ooh, good questions. Okay, so different species kind of have different preferences. There are some species that will hang out almost everywhere, like the Photinus pyralls, the common eastern or the Big Dipper firefly. You'll see them in lawns, in native meadows, maybe not so much in forests, but they're pretty widespread. And then there are other species that really prefer wetland areas, riparian areas. There are some species that hang out or flash at the tops of tree canopies. And if you see those, to me, it almost looks like Christmas tree lights. It looks like they're having a little firefly rave. So different species have different habitat preferences. And then in terms of weather, they are insects, so they are ectotherms. So they do need it to be kind of warm to be most active. But if you were to go out on a summer evening and maybe a thunderstorm had just rolled in and rolled through, and it was a little bit damp, sometimes you might see that they will not flash when it's raining, but then once it stops raining, it's almost like they feel like, this is me projecting, but to me it seems like they feel like they have to make up for lost time, and so they'll all kind of come out and start flashing during that window of opportunity when it's not raining, and then they'll stop if it starts raining again. But it's convenient if you're a firefly researcher, because it means you probably don't have to do field work if it's raining.
All right. We also have several questions around mating in terms of, do the males try to do something like outflash other males? What do females, look for in a mate? Do males fight? How do those females choose from all these hundreds or thousands of males in the field?
Oh, that's a great question. Just, like some different bird species have different male displays that are most closely tied to being a successful mate. Different firefly species have different, slightly different things that a female might be looking for. So for some species, it's the length of the flash that's important. So males with a slightly longer flash might be more likely to mate. For other species, like the synchronous fireflies, it seems to be that it's all about being able to flash at the same time as everybody else in your area. And that is just such a fascinating phenomenon that we have a lot that we need to learn about. And then of course, the females are really cueing in on the different patterns that they're seeing. And they want to make sure that they are flashing with a firefly that is the same species as them.
And here's a quick, simple question. What do they eat and how long is their lifespan?
Great questions. So fireflies live 1 to 2 years overall, but only a little portion of that is spent in the adult phase. So they spend 1 to 2 years as adults, 1 to 2 months as adults, but 1 to 2 years overall. So most of the time that a firefly is a firefly, it is in that weird looking larval stage. And then what do fireflies eat? Well, those firefly larvae can be really fierce predators, and they will eat soft-bodied invertebrates down in the soil. So slugs, snails, beetle grubs, that kind of stuff. Then as adults, some fireflies don't really eat at all as adults. So the Photinus pyralls, the common eastern firefly, that one that you're really likely to catch and put in a jar because they're just such slow flyers, they do not eat at all as adults. But then there are those fierce predators in the genus Photuris that will sometimes eat other fireflies. They kind of mimic the prey firefly's flash patterns and lure them in and eat them. It's very exciting.
So since they spend so much time as larvae and not as much time as adults, how do they transition from larvae to adults?
Yeah, good question. So if you think back, caterpillars become pupa or chrysalises, and they kind of come out as adults. Fireflies are beetles, so they'll kind of do the same thing. So the larva will pupate, and the pupa will kind of hang out in a sheltered place, so maybe under a log or down in the leaf litter. And then the adults will come out of those pupa, ready to do their firefly thing and flash around and mate. And then once the adults mate a couple times, that's pretty much the end for them. It's lay eggs and then circle of life continues.
And I like this question because of a lot of space talk has been in the news recently. Have fireflies been taken to the space station and studied, or anywhere in space?
Ooh, I have not read anything about that. If someone in the audience knows better, let me know. But fireflies in space would be so cool. That would be awesome.
Maybe you can take them up to space, study those on the next blue ocean, I think is what it's called, heading up.
Yeah.
Bet, how are we on time?
We are a couple minutes after 8, so we probably should try to wrap up. I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions, but then we probably should
Okay, kind of one little collection of questions that I see here is, things that could negatively impact fireflies, which you gave some examples, but specifically someone asked about milky spore. Does that negatively impact fireflies? And then someone else also asked and said, hey, I have this field that I bush hog it once a year in early spring. Does that negatively impact fireflies?
So those are both great questions. And, I'll just say kind of overall that although, everybody loves fireflies and they're so charismatic, there's so much that we don't know about them, which is both sad and surprising and kind of cool, because it means that there's so much that we have to discover about these insects. So I have not read anything specifically about milky spore, but now I'm really curious. And so I want to learn more about that one. And then in terms of bush hogging in early spring, around here, at least, it seems like the adults are coming out end of May. And before that, they are probably down in the soil or in a sheltered place. And so I think if you can time it so that you're bush hogging before the emergence of the adults in the summer, I think that would probably be preferred, at least for these fireflies. There may be other native insects and plants that you would think about. But if we're just thinking about fireflies, I think timing that treatment to be before the adults come out would probably make sense.
All right. And thank you so much for your time tonight, Ariel. And you have many comments of thanks here in the chat directly to you as well. Also really great comments on how appropriate your name is to study fireflies. So I want to thank everyone for attending. Beth, I don't know if you have any other closeout matters for tonight. We'll all give big rounds of applause for Ariel.
Thanks so much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. I hope you found it illuminating.
No pun intended. Yeah, so thanks for coming, both to Ariel and to everyone who was in the audience. And we hope to see you at another event sometime really soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.